September 1944, a heavy fog sits over the low fields between Arracourt and Luneville. Along a shallow rise, a Sherman crew from the 37th Tank Battalion waits with engines warm after a night of wrench work. In the rear, artillery from the 4th Armoured Division has every crossroads pre-registered. On the net, the commander's voice is clipped and dry, rehearsing the fire order one last time. Across the mist, companies from the new Panzer Brigades of the 5th Panzer Army feel their way forward, green crews hunched over blurred maps. Colonel Bruce C. Clarke keeps Combat Command A tight and low. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams has his platoons dug into pockets of earth motionless. A German hull noses past a hedgerow mantlet, sweeping left. On the opposite slope, the Sherman's gunner rides the bounce and still holds the sight picture. On. The tube recoils. The shot strikes the Panther's mantlet. The main gun jerks high and freezes as smoke rolls backward into the turret. The old script Panther spots fires the American flinch's wide brakes in a single impact. Inside the German tank, coughing replaces orders. Spall pings around steel. The American radio stays cold. Target burning. Shift left. Watch the lane. 2 fields over. Another Panther wallows in mud as the driver fights the gearbox. A second Sherman has already slid to its alternate. Nose down, it hammers a side plate. Trees quiver with the pressure wave. Armour fragments patter onto wet soil. U.S. Artillery begins to walk, the intersections burst after burst, folding into the fog. No one cheers. There is no explanation, only the dry hiss of fire inside a turret, the whisper of new target lines on the net, and the weight of silence settling over a village road where the myth was supposed to hold. By mid-September 1944, the fight in Lorraine had narrowed to a test of methods under bad weather. 3rd Army's de Slough Corps was pressing east of Nancy, and at the Arracourt-Luneville line, the ground rolled in low fields and hedged lanes that collected fog at dawn. Air power was unreliable in this grey hour, so what decided contact was routine, who arrived with more running guns, who found the first steady sight picture, who could move a platoon 10 meters after firing without losing coherence. The United States brought process. Colonel Bruce C. Clarke kept Combat Command A, compact and wired to Division Artil. That psychology was the quiet stake. The Panthers' reputation for killing at distance and shrugging common Sherman rounds still held in many minds. If dawn encounters in Lorraine fit that legend, American platoons would slow, artillery would shift from shaping the field to covering withdrawals, and days would bleed away while the west wall hardened. If the legend cracked at the point of contact, if American crews kept there, both sides had reasons to believe the morning would favor them. German staff work assumed that fog suppressed American air attacks and masked approach routes long enough for Panthers to present frontal arcs and choose terms. Fresh brigades promised crisp force at the seam lines, a short, violent jab to break the rhythm of 3rd Army's advance. American officers understood the price of any lapse. A clean frontal look across a long field was still a bad bet for an M4, and crews had lived enough burned hulls to treat the Panther's gun with respect rather than theory. Fatigue was real after months of marching and fi. Underneath the gunnery, logistics pulled on the outcome like an unseen rope. Panthers arrived with striking power, but with green crews and drivetrains that punished hard maneuver on wet ground. Every breakdown became a forward recovery problem, and a lost hour on the clock. M4S arrived in depth with spares that fit and with crews that expected to spend darkness, tightening tracks and fixing misfires, so that at first light more tubes would answer. The question in Lorraine was not simply whose gun was longer, it was. The map narrowed the choices further. The Moselle crossings to the west gave Clarke no appetite for delay. Each day saved was pressure applied before the enemy could set another line. German commanders could not afford glorious exchanges that left Panthers disabled in ditches. Each hull that failed to return to line reduced not just firepower, but the aura that moved grenadiers forward. That aura one superior hull can lock a road was the currency Germany still tried to spend. Clarke and Abrams aimed to make that currency counterfeit by turning every contact into the same dull procedure. Find the notch, hold the picture. Fire once, move, let the artillery walk. So the stakes at Arracourt fit inside one dawn. If Panthers earned early kills, tempo would bend, and hesitation would spread through radio nets. If American crews repeated their pattern across 2 or 3 lanes, the myth would stop buying time. In that fog, doctrine met nerve. What broke would not be steels. The Panther's danger was real and immediate, in the kinds of ground where its designers meant it to fight. The long 75 threw a fast, flat shot that punished. What arrived in Lorraine was not that ideal ground. Fog made every length of lane a guess hedges cut sightly. The American answer was not an improved myth, but a bow. The artillery net made the lanes hostile in a way the eye could not show. Batteries had their squares drawn and their times rehearsed. A crossroads that looked empty at first light was already a trap. When a German column entered the box, shells arrived not to kill tanks by blast, but to stagger everything around the tanks. Mud thrown, grenadiers pinned, drivers distracted, commanders pulled down into turrets. It was not a knockout punch. It was a hand on the back of the enemy's helmet pushing his eyes away from the one thing he had to see. At crew level, the technical argument translated into a single sentence. At 200 meters, the first man with a steady sight picture wins in 3 seconds. If the Panther had to swing its nose to clear a hedge, a sliver of side showed. That was the window, and training had already named it. Nobody waited to be sure longer than the drill allowed. The loader did not narrate. The commander did not promise. The gunner had a picture, or he did not. If he had it, the tube recoiled. The first engagement makes the headlines of memory, but the proof that this was not an accident came 2 lanes away, where the ground repeated the same flaws at a smaller scale. A second Panther, taking the same kind of bend on a churned track, paused half a heartbeat in mud to regain traction. The driver had no choice. According to his instruments, the engine was healthy, but the earth pulled at his idlers, and the gearbox complained. A Sherman that had slid to an alternate notch during the first shots presented nothing but a sliver of glacis to the lane mouth. The crew had their own drill, not a heroic instinct: watch the bend, wait for the swing, take the plate, move again. The hit was not dramatic, it was placed. The sound inside the German hull was the same mix of cough and spall ping as before. A little later, a push across a crossroad showed how the American routine handled something less favorable than a perfect ambush. A Panther led with a Panzer IV tucked behind, and grenadiers threaded between ditches. The first Sherman took its shot and displaced. The second handled the follow-through, catching the Peds 4 when the lead hull masked its support. The artillery walked into the intersection. Grenadiers, who might have flanked into a ditch, turned flat to the ground and stayed there. The Panther's commander had no clean way to present only his front. Every solution now intersected with smoke, mud, or a short American relocation that reset the sight lines. The net carried small words: only burn, left, right, smoke, move. The effect was cumulative and ugly. Nothing about this taught a lesson of superiority. It taught repetition. The Panther's crew habits, sound at a school with measured ranges, fought the clock and the soil in Lorraine. A long hull that was easy to place square to a target at 500 meters on a range became an obstacle to its own gun in a village corner. The traverse motor took the time it took. The commander's cupola was not immune to the need to duck under incoming splinters. Each time he did, seconds vanished. The crew's readiness to engage front-on remained valid in theory, but in practice, front-on was rare at the instant of decision. What the Americans had arranged was not armor parity, but a narrowing of the fight to those instants. Crew voices make better proof than numbers. A Sherman gunner recalled that the worst part of a lane fight was losing the reticle in the bounce and going hunting for it, while the commander hissed for a picture. The stabilizer cut that panic down to a breath. A Panther loader cursed the way smoke, not enemy shells, erased his world. He knew his gun could end this quarrel if the tube had a target. But each time the commander stood to find one, the sky came down in fragments and dust. Neither man cared about generalities in the moment. Each cared if the next 3 seconds belonged to him. Even the breakdowns have a rhythm. One Panther that lived through a miss and back to reset faced a different enemy than the Sherman's now hidden from its sight logistics. A squeal from forward motion climbed into a grind. The driver's hand hovered between bravery and preservation. Mechanics had warned about the cost of an aggressive gear change at a bad angle. He chose to save the box. The cost was exposure to the next relocation shot. On the American side, the cost of a pulled spark plug or a loose track pin had been paid in darkness. The gun answered on time. None of this erased the Panther's lethality when and where it saw its fight. Later that same day, a long field did present itself, and an American tank that tried to cross it took a hard frontal hit and burned while the crew jumped into wet furrows. The point is not that the machine ceased to be dangerous. The point is that the ground, the weather, and the habits of one side pulled more contacts into the band where danger shifted. By late morning the pattern had a shape. A German nose appeared. A short, deliberate American shot answered. A relocation cut the line of any reply. Artillery folded corners into discomfort, not cratered moonscapes. Grenadiers learned to wait for smoke to thin rather than surge forward. Panthers that survived an exchange were encouraged by their officers to pull back and reframe the fight at longer lines, but the lanes did not offer those lines reliably. The American crews did not celebrate a doctrine. They simply repeated it. The little words on the net kept their force. The tanks that could run kept running. The myth behind the platform was that a superior gun and face could lock a road at will. In Lorraine, the road fought back with hedges and fog, and a process that did not care about applause turned those into weapons. What reads like a footnote in a manual pre-arranged fires, short relocations, hull down at micro-range becomes 3 breathing seconds given to one side and taken from the other. That is how steel meets time. This is not luck. It is a procedure that survives the fog. Fog beads on the periscope like sweat. The commander wipes it with the edge of a glove and smears it worse, a dull crescent of moisture that turns the hedgerow into a grey smear. Damp wool presses under his chin strap. The turret motor hums, and then catches a faint whine as the loader nudges the foot switch, and the gunner murmurs he has the reticle. Cold oil makes everything sluggish, traverse elevation, even breath. The radio hisses without words. The commander lowers into the cupola shoulders, brushing the padded ring, and gives the familiar short sequence. The loader's hand disappears into the ready rack palm on a blunt steel nose that feels colder than the air. The shell thumps into the breech with that same practical sound he has heard 100 times on the range. Routine kill, he tells himself. Fog favors the first look. The gun will do the rest. The driver eases the long nose through a break in the hedge. The hull rides up on sodden earth and dips. Condensation rings tremble on the glass. The gunner tracks the shimmer that means a lane beyond the hedge. The commander lifts just enough to take a bearing. His breath fogs the periscope. He wipes again, impatient. Fog is a blanket thrown over everything familiar, no sun angle to read, no distant barn roof to anchor the world. The turret hums, edging left. A shape at the edge of view, nothing distinct, just a suggestion of geometry where plants are supposed to be chaos. The gunner breathes, resets the shoulder against the pad, and the loader's fingers rest open against the next round, as if the hand already expects to lift. The hull bounces once as the driver takes a rut. The reticle slides. The gunner waits for the picture to settle. The commander swings his head to the other prism and loses it for a fraction of a second. In that fraction, a new light blooms white on the mantlet, wrong and brilliant sunless fire. The main gun kicks high and stays up. Sound becomes a solid thing that hits the side of the face. Something hot and small kisses the loader's wrist, and he claws his sleeve as if stung by a wasp. Smoke rolls backward over teeth, metallic and sweet, and all 3 men cough at once so hard their headsets shift. The driver's hands jerk on the tillers, and he feels the long hull pause where it should have pushed one track, digging for grip. The gunner blinks and sees a triangle of bright black in the sight where there should be the steady world. He flips the elevation wheel in reflex and meets dead weight. The wheel is stiff, then harder, then nothing. The commander's helmet rim taps the edge of the cupola as he ducks without deciding to. His eyes water and turn the interior into a shaky image of red and brass and sweat. He shouts for reverse without hearing his own voice in the headset. The radio squeals. The loader has a second shell halfway out of the rack before the muscles in his forearm tell him the breech will not take it. He stops mid-motion, and the shell's weight hangs out of place, absurd and heavy. The driver asks for permission to punch it or save the box. He doesn't use those words. He uses the name of a gear and the name of a fear-second final drive. He knows what the mechanics told him about wet ground and hard-angle torque. He also knows there is a shape out there that just put a shot where he lives. The commander says reverse, and his voice is a cough wrapped around a consonant. The driver picks preservation, and the tank obeys as if insulted, backing slow track slipping on the wet edge of a ditch, the hull tilting to a degree that makes the loader brace a knee against the rack. Another light leans through the fog, less bright, lower a flicker through smoke that tastes like cordite and burnt primer. A tapping like hail moves across the turret wall, spall or stones the ear cannot tell. The loader pulls the extinguisher lever and feels the cable resist like muscle. Somewhere aft, a small fire hiss breathes and then stops. The commander risks the hatch, pushing it up a fist's width. The air beyond is not air, but grit. Something flicks off the lip of the cupola, a spark or splinter. The hatch comes back down, not slammed, just pressed until it kisses the ring. He wants to say words that will gather the crew into a shape again, names, commands, jokes, but air is work, and the net is a crowd of competing groans, and his eyes sting. Across the lane, a different crew is quiet. The smell is warm oil and clean metal, because half the night was spent making it so. The commander's headset sits just wrong on a tender spot above his ear, but he ignores it because he always ignores it. The stabilizer's hum is a low companionship under the engine note. The loader has 2 rounds up front, and palms the third by habit knee braced against an ammo bin so he can float with the recoil. The driver's left boot taps twice and stops because he caught himself. His right hand feels the bite of the grip even before he moves. The gunner sits a little too high and then drops his cheek that last half-inch onto the rest, letting the sight fill the world. On the commander says, and the gunner says nothing because the picture is enough and because words are for empty time. The tube recoils, the world thumps through their bodies, the loader's heel locks and his hands move before the smoke has time to be real. Round in, breach close. The driver drops a gear, and the hull noses down as if bowing. 10 meters. The commander does not look to see the effect. He listens. The net is cold. The words are tiny things that live in the space between breaths. Burning. Left. Lane. The bow gun stays quiet. The assistant driver watches ditch lines for a man with a tube and a long stick who will be close enough that the tank will feel his breath. The commander tells the artillery to walk the road the way a man asks someone to pass the salt at a table. The first shells begin to land so far out of rhythm that rhythm changes to their time. Cordite dries the back of the throat. The gunner tastes iron and dust. He tracks a patch of fog that seems too smooth and waits to see if it has edges. He is ready to shoot again, but the words and the plan and the decades of other men's hours sit on his shoulders and tell him to move before he shoots. He moves. The hull crawls left and up onto a churned lip of field that shakes the sight. The stabilizer catches not to keep it perfect, just to keep it enough. The gunner rides the bounce, and his breath is one long quiet that ends at the trigger. In the German tank, the commander listens to the radio and hears only his own breath and the lift and fall of coughing. He presses the throat switch and says his unit's name, the lane's number, the village he thinks is to his right. He gets an answer from artillery that does not help him. He asks the grenadiers on the left where they are and gets no answer at all. He tells the driver to stop exposing the side, and the driver answers that exposure is a function of mud and that the machine has its own ideas today. The commander hates that he understands. He asks for smoke and knows the loader will need what feels like an hour to move in this air. He thinks about lifting the hatch again and remembers the small sound against the rim and the way light feels when it breaks into pieces. The loader tries to be efficient and fails at the edges. He knows each corner of the turret by skin, not sight, and still the extinguisher lever catches on the cuff of his jacket and pulls loose threads. He tells himself to breathe through his nose. Smoke makes a liar of him. He thinks the main gun will come back to life if he holds the wheel, the way he held the handle of his father's pump with patience and with weight. It does not. He does not curse because cursing is more air than he can spare. The driver looks once at the engine temperature because numbers are familiar and forgiving, and then he looks back into a slit that gives him a picture smaller than a postcard. He can see the world the way a man might see a hallway when his eyes are full of soap. He wants the commander to call him a direction that is not a compass, but a word like barn or ditch, but the commander has only fog words too. He times the bites of the track and makes them even. The hull obeys in a sulk. Reverse becomes a posture, not a distance. On the American net, the 4-beat cadence repeats. Identify, acquire, fire, relocate. It is not poetry. It is a checklist that is short because time is short. The loader wipes the breech face with a rag that was grey when the morning started and is black now. He resettles, not because comfort is real in the space he occupies, but because a body wants to know where it begins and ends. The commander scans right, because left is someone else's job for this half-minute. He sees nothing he trusts, and trusts nothing he sees because fog is a mirror that lies. He calls for a small shift from the guns on the grid, and the world at the intersection shivers as though a giant hand pressed down on it and let go. 2 fields away, the pattern repeats itself with the small originality of new misery. A second German crew tries to nose out of a lane that is more slurry than ground. The driver feels the gearbox complain in a higher pitch, and thinks of the lecture he heard 2 weeks ago about angles and load. He does not want to break his charge. He also does not want to die with a lecture in his head. He chooses to nurse the box through the bend. That choice exposes a rectangle of side to a place where a different American tank has already slid according to the plan, and is already waiting according to the plan, and is not excited about any of it. The shot is a hammer tap compared to the first. Inside the German tank, the sensation is the same: light without sun, air without oxygen, voices replaced by the mechanical fact of pain. The Americans do not celebrate. Men do not celebrate when they are still hunting for where a ditch becomes a trench. The bow gun tracks a line of weeds that might be a man, and then the weeds are only weeds. The commander keeps his head low because he has learned to distrust sky when there is metal in it. The loader tastes the bitter edge of the primer and swallows to push it away, which does nothing. The driver flicks eyes to the right, where he imagines not sees a man with a single-shot tube and a plan simplified by bravery and short distance. He wants to roll forward and away from that possible man, but the commander's voice places the tank in a notch that is perfect for the next 15 seconds, and that next 15 seconds is the size of the world. Artillery does not kill tanks reliably at close range, but it kills the moments that tanks need to be smart. The German infantry, who wanted to run a line around the lane, flatten when the crossroads begins to cough earth. A sergeant decides silence will last longer than motion. He is right for the next minute and wrong for the next 5. No one is there to adjudicate. The Panther commander waits for the smoke to thin because he cannot spend a life on a guess, and because the number of lives in his tank is small and easy to count. He knows his gun can decide this if it sees. It does not see. He orders a retreat that is not in the book because the book did not account for this hour and this fog and this radio. Later, when a stretch of ground opens into a field that has the length and honesty of a range, a Panther with room to breathe takes a frontal look and earns the kill it was built to earn. An American medium tries to cross and dies in a straight line that would make sense to any instructor. The crew leaves smoke and men in wet furrows behind it. The exception proves nothing. It lives where it lives, and says only that machines retain their purpose when the world allows it. The world in Lorraine allows it less often than the math suggests. Inside the American tank, the crew counts 3 things: only rounds remaining forward, notches they have used, notches they have not. How long since the last order from the company net? They do not keep a calendar of victories. They do not narrate fear because fear is a private thing until it breaks something, and today it has not broken anything yet. The gunner's cheek has a small line where the rest has rubbed a welt into the skin. He will not notice until night. The loader's fingertips are black past the nails, and he will scrub them with a rag and find the colour lives there now. The commander will lie later with a headache that lives where the headset presses, and will think it is the weather. The driver will think of the left boot tapping, and he will stop it again from habit. German crews learn in a morning what manuals could not tell them. Smoke is not simply concealment, it is blindness and panic mated. Mud is not simply traction. It is time that disappears into the earth. The artillery that does not kill you steals the seconds you meant for something else. The radio is loudest when it has least to say. The commander who does not like to button up will learn to choose between eyes and will pick skin when the first ring of shrapnel kisses the hatch lip. The loader, who tries to run the drill as if nothing is different, will meet mechanisms that have finished their day early. The driver who keeps the machine alive may lose men to the next careful enemy who appears at an angle as inevitable as geometry. The Americans learn nothing they did not already know. They only perform. The doctrine they practiced in a dry field becomes shorter by half a sentence when the ground steals time. They step forward in edges rather than strides. They talk less because words take air and seconds. They think about Panzerfaust angles because those are the angles that kill complacency, and they move a little every time the main gun breathes because death likes a fixed address. They do not assign meaning to this not now. Meaning is for after. The radio has no place to put meaning and no code for it. In the German tank, the coughing settles into silence that is uneasy because silence can be a pause or an ending. Someone says the name of a town as if it were a prayer. Someone else says the name of the tank as if the tank could be shamed into life. The commander rests his head against the cupola ring for 1 second and feels the cold push into his skin and drag him back to himself. He orders smoke again, knowing it will arrive slow and thin, a gesture rather than a curtain. The loader looks at his hands and thinks about the heat of the shell he never got to seat. He fixes his eyes on the breech, as if looking harder will make it accept work again. The driver watches for the bite of the track and makes them count the same, too disciplined to pray to dirt. Across the lane, the American commander watches right because left belongs to another platoon for now. He tastes the cordite again, a new layer on an old flavor. He wants to clean the glass, because clean glass is what you do when the world is wrong. He does not. He trusts the crosswind of smoke to be someone else's problem in the next minute. He calls the grid once more, and the artillery shifts by yards, not fields. He says 2 words, shift left. The gunner does not answer. He does. The loader hears the empty metal sound that is not really a sound so much as an absence, and fills it with a new round. The driver redistributes weight to keep the hull from rutting. A small rhythm grows in the machine that only its crew can feel, a rhythm of hard work, not heroism. Somewhere to the south, a single shot barks, and no one in these 2 tanks ever learns who fired it or at whom. Somewhere to the north, men run across a lane because their lieutenant says to, and 2 of them are not there when the group arrives at the ditch. Their names will live in another official language, one without fog. On this small square, the next 15 seconds arrive, and then the next. The Americans keep the gun up. The Germans try to keep the machine intact. These are opposing answers to the same question. The fog remains impartial. The commander in the Panther makes a decision that feels like defeat and might be survival. He orders a full reverse out of the lane and into cover he cannot see. He knows he may back into worse. He knows staying here delivers a certainty he refuses. The driver answers with a word rather than a sentence. The loader braces. The gun stays useless, a sleeping animal at the heart of the machine. The tank backs, stalls, bites, moves again. Smoke kisses the periscope and leaves it wetter, more blind. The commander holds the cupola rim with both hands and feels steel pretend to be bone. The American tank listens to its own engine and to the thin voices that link it to other hulls doing the same job. A second crew calls a burning target in a voice that is almost bored. The commander imagines the men across the fields he cannot see and finds comfort there, not joy. He thinks for 1 second about the shape of the day, how long it will run, whether they will leave this lane or whether this lane will leave them. He shrugs the thought off like a coat and returns to the tiny picture that lives in front of his gunner. Time stretches, then contracts. A shell lands behind the German tank and lifts mud onto the rear deck, making a noise like a wet book dropped on wood. The driver flinches at the sound he cannot translate into map points. The loader swears softly without air behind the sound. The commander smiles at nothing because the universe is smaller than the inside of his helmet, and smiles take less air than swears. He does not know that a man across a field has eyes on his side plate again, only that the world insists on this angle and this danger. He tells his driver to cut right, and the driver tells him the earth declines the invitation. When the second shot comes, the Panther is already most of the way out of trouble and not enough. The hit is low and mean and breaks something the crew cannot name without getting out to sea. The driver feels it as a change in the way the machine speaks through the floor. The commander hears it as a decree. The loader feels it as a chill. They keep moving because movement is the last ritual, the last thing that proves they are men in a machine rather than men inside a story someone else is telling. In the American tank, the crew does not watch the effect. They have already moved. The commander says, "Watch the lane," and the words roll into the engine note and vanish. The gunner resets his cheek. The loader settles his feet. The driver looks for the next notch as if he is finding a bed for a friend. The bow gunner tracks weeds again and thinks they looked like a man just then, but the weeds are still just weeds. On both nets, the words shrink. The difference is not who is brave. The difference is who still has a working gun for the next 3 seconds. Decisions changed the fight before any crew thumbed a trigger. On the American side, those decisions were small, mechanical, and repeated until they formed a surface you could stand on. On the German side, those decisions were large, confident, and brittle when the ground and the clock turned against T. Clarke ran the ground like a machine that needed only short strokes to produce an effect. Intersections were mapped into boxes. Fire direction centers rehearsed time on target for each box until the call-outs were muscle memory. Abrams shaped his battalion around short bounds and notches, not hero lines. Every platoon carried the same geometry in its head: a primary hull-down slit, an alternate 10 to 20 meters away, and a tertiary angle that existed to defeat the enemy's second decision, not the first. The mental map was, at dawn, this produces a doctrine that looks like a habit: identify, acquire, fire, relocate. The words are unromantic because they are supposed to survive panic. The stabilizer that once felt like a curiosity becomes a tool The drill extends to fear that is accounted for rather than denied. Bow gunners scan ditch lines not to score a kill but to prevent 5 meters from erasing 10 minutes. Infantry screens hold corners because tanks cannot be everywhere at noon if they die foolishly at dawn. No tank idles at a lane mouth. No turret stares down a straight for longer than a breath. The platoon does not repeat the same frontal look twice if it can help it. Everything is designed to buy those 3 seconds in which the first steady sight picture exists and is used. Industrial depth makes this affordable. The M4 was not built to outperform a Panther's gun at range. It was built to show up, start, and stay. Interchangeable parts and standardized tools make the difference between a deadline and a live one at 0530. The maintenance clock is measured in hours. A misbehaving magneto or a bulky traverse is more likely to have been nudged in darkness than written off for tomorrow. Recovery is not a rumor, a bogged H. People are treated as part of the logistics layer rather than mythology. Replacements arrive and are slotted into a cadence that already exists, not into a vacuum where the last charismatic voice defined survival. Crews rotate not because sentiment requires it, but because fatigue is a maintenance item. The pipeline runs on procedures, not personalities, which means an absent man is an absence in a seat, not an absence in a method. The battalion's rhythm holds. German decisions assumed that platform primacy could carry a fight if that platform gained the first look. On paper, there is logic to this. The Panther's long gun murders complacency in open ground. Its glacis spoils trajectories that older ballistics love. Its optics reward patience and smooth hands. That logic required time and sight lines to manifest. The new Panzer Brigades reached Lorraine short of both. Reconnaissance was thin. Maps were wrong at the margins that matter, and infantry screens could not consistently mate with armoured noses on the schedule that fog allowed. The large decision to bet on the machine's inherent dominance collided with the small decisions that hedges and bad soil impose. The turret traverse that is fine on a range becomes slow when a hull must clear a hedge and turn a corner, while someone unseen already holds a stable picture. The long hull that looks disciplined on a parade ground becomes a lever that exposes side angles without asking permission. Final drives and gearboxes that can be managed on dry, clean roads become liabilities in wet maneuver, where the driver must decide whether to punish the machine to make a timing window or preserve it and enter a kill window. Each breakdown is not a number. It is a forward recovery crisis that consumes trucks, time, crew, confidence, and the very maintenance capacity the brigade needed to build tempo. A single stalled Panther can hold an assault the way a single burned American medium could ruin a field. The difference is the depth behind each event. Fuel scarcity makes every unscheduled movement expensive. Spare part gaps make every breakdown a bargaining session. Commanders feel this in their bones. They begin to think of each Panther as a capital asset rather than a consumable tool. A capital asset does not lead into lanes where maps do not agree with hedges. A capital asset does not risk a corner fight without elaborate preparation that the weather denies. A capital asset, once hurt, dictates the tempo of the unit that must now retrieve it. Units formed to strike fast discover they are manned by crews who cannot absorb complex corner solutions at speed. Cohesion breaks when the front stalls, and the rear cannot close the distance. Contrast the risk calculus. The American commander can accept a close-range shot if the platoon will move again, the artillery will freeze the follow-on, and the maintenance floor will put 2 of 3 disabled hulls back into the net before dark. The German commander understands that a single lost Panther is a hole in his ability to act for a week, and that the trained men inside are not easily replaced by a pipeline already dry. One side treats risk as amortized across depth. The other treats risk as a debt that compounds. This reaches upward and downward at the same time. After-action notes generated from the first contacts do not die in a drawer. By noon, the day's new cautions are spoken on the net and folded into adjacent lanes. By evening, the fire tables are adjusted around the intersections that proved more stubborn. Smoke is assigned to movement masks by default, not thrown into duels. Briefings at CCA and division levels value repeatability over highlight reels. All of it looks persistent. The German learning loop is real but late. Reports acknowledge that fog and hedges change the terms, and that Panther shock is bled away when approach routes are guessed rather than known. Orders push reconnaissance forward and ask artillery to stitch closer to armor noses. The capacity to fulfill those orders is intermittent. Fuel is rationed at the wrong moment. Wire lines fail. Replacement radios arrive with their own language of quirks. Green crews improve across days and then disappear inside a hull that failed and will not return this week. Quantities manifest as behavior, not charts. There are more American guns awake at dawn. There are more first shots taken from hull-down notches at micro-range. There are more German noses paused at bends. There are more American tanks that move before a reply can find them. There are more grenadiers pinned by artillery called at conversational volume. There are fewer moments when a Panther presents only its front to a crew that stands still long enough to be taught a fatal lesson. The differential is not glamorous. It is made of seconds recovered and seconds stolen. Even the way each side handles silence betrays the doctrine behind it. American nets shrink language to mission atoms because economy protects cognition when breathing itself is labor. German nets carry more request and less effect because the components that should answer are occupied by problems that do not die to courage. A truck that failed to start a map that misled 2 turns, back a final drive that complained right when a lane demanded momentum. No one is incompetent. Many are constrained. Engineering meets logistics and writes an answer that strategy alone cannot overwrite. At the level of a single lane, the doctrine looks like 2 men making different trades with the same 15 seconds. An American commander spends 1 second to call a shift, 2 seconds for the gunner to ride a bounce into a picture, 1 second to break that picture into recoil, 3 seconds to move, and 8 to wait for the next order, while the bow gun watches for the only threat that can negate a good plan at breathing distance. A German commander spends 2 seconds to confirm a bearing 2, to decide whether to risk traverse against mud 3, to plead sight through a periscope, that lies 3 to order a motion, the machine resists, and 5 to endure artillery, that kills nothing but the window he needs. Multiply that by the number of lanes, call it doctrine. By afternoon, the fight begins to resemble a maintenance diagram. Recovery lines loop across the map. Wreckers and half-tracks tug dead weight from ditches. Some hulls return with patches and missing fenders and guns that still answer. Others enter the static economy of battlefield salvage. The American column absorbs this without losing the cadence of its ambush geometry. The German column bends around its dead and wastes its day protecting the living. The plan on one side tolerates failure as a cost. The plan on the other side is warped by it. The decision tables on which officers put their fingers are simple. Hold the intersections with fires, not bodies. At contact, keep the fight inside a band where sight beats thickness. Do not trade time for exposition. Do not repeat a frontal look. Do not chase a kill past your notch. Put dread where it belongs in the other crew's next 3 seconds. These are not slogans. They are instructions that can be performed while coughing cordite and mud. Their value is that any new man can be taught to do them, and any tired man can still do them. A different set of tables, drafted in good faith and with fine machines in mind, run into the uncorrectable conditions of that week. Present the front, take the long look, break morale with first hits that oblige retreats, reframe the field as a range. They remain true where they can be performed and fail where the map denies them. The gulf between a plan that contorts to ground and a plan that requires ground to behave manifests as burned hulls, stalled noses, and commanders with fewer choices each hour. What remains at the end of the day is not an argument about whose tank was better, but a ledger of whose choices produced more working guns when it mattered. The assembly of small American decisions, maintenance done at night boxes pre-arranged for artillery notches, dug into memory stabilizers trusted for a breath relocation, given the same weight as gunnery, adds up to tempo. The assembly of German constraints cruise green, where precision was demanded, drivetrains sulking in mud, fuel and spares counted like coins. Reconnaissance thin, where certainty was assumed, adds up to caution. Caution is rational and fatal when the other side insists on contact and accepts friction as rent. A morning of contacts turns into an afternoon of doctrine. Crews repeat the 4-beat cadence across fields. Artillery clocks match platoon clocks. Recovery lines hum. Reports written in the hour of exhaustion are short and clear enough to be read and used before the next dawn. There is no speech about superiority. There is proof that the method survives the fog and that the machine behind it, the network of spares and hands and habits, makes that survival normal rather than lucky. America fights like an assembly line. Germany guards a museum piece. The myth was simple and persuasive. Present the front see first, fire first, and a Panther can lock a road the way a gate locks a field. Morning fog would help. The thinking went masking approach until the long gun could choose its range and write the opening line in fire. At Arracourt, that logic hit a surface made of hedges, mud, and seconds that belonged to someone else. Lanes and village corners pulled every contact into a band, where penetration charts mattered less than which crew stabilized a picture at 200 meters and used it. The first exchanges showed it clearly. A Panther tried to earn its geometry nose square turret on, only to find that getting square took time, the soil refused. By the moment the mantlet found its sector, a Sherman that had waited in a pre-sighted notch had already fired and moved 10 meters. The reply window closed as fast as it opened. Crews felt the change before reports named it. German commanders discovered that present the front was not a posture but a timing problem, with too many thieves. A rut that took a second, a traverse that took a second, a breath to confirm a bearing, a blink lost to smoke. American commanders discovered that fog, when folded into procedure, ceased to be an enemy. The stabilizer did not make miracles, it saved a breath. The short bound did not win glory. It denied the second look that the long gun needed. Artillery did not crater lanes into safety. It stole the attention of the grenadiers who would have made corner fighting suicidal. Across 2, then 3 lanes, the cadence repeated. First Panther halted or burning at a bend. Second element masked by smoke. Follow-ons pinned at intersections, walked by HE. Logs turned sensation into doctrine by noon. The lane drill micro-range first shot immediate displacement, no repeated frontal looks. Anti-Panzerfaust hygiene stopped being a good idea and became the way things were done. Intersections were treated as machines feed in coordinates, get out seconds of enemy paralysis. On the other side, brigade notes bled verbs. Attack through, softened into reform and reset at longer lines. Orders to present frontal arcs were replaced by admonitions to avoid unscouted corners without infantry and smoke. Commanders began to pull damaged hulls early, not as mercy, but as preservation of what little striking power remained. Preservation is rational. It is also the end of hunting. The psychological trade flipped. For U.S., Crew's Panther fear moved from a story to a checklist, dangerous at range, manageable in lanes if the 4-beat cadence held. For German crews, the road-locking Predator turned into a capital asset whose survival dictated tactics. Every stall invited a wrecker, every wrecker consumed time, every minute burned off the aura that had been doing so much work since summer. The field did not announce a revolution. It whispered the same answer in every lane until belief changed sides. By the end of the morning, the promise that a single superior hull could dictate terms had lost its seconds. What remained was weight cost and the habit of pulling back intact steel from places where once it had been sent to dominate. That was the last morning the Panther was a promise. After that, it was an expensive target Germany could not afford to lose. In the days after the fog fights, the map around Arracourt stopped lurching and started hardening in the Americans' favor. Contact after contact arrived as a version of the same problem for the Germans, a lane that narrowed time, a crossroads that answered to artillery, a platoon that would not hold a straight look long enough to be taught a lesson. Combat Command A kept the line without dramatic announcements. Batteries walked shells into intersections as a reflex. Tank platoons treated micro-range first shots and 10-meter displacements as breathing. The picture that circulated up the chain was not a trophy photo, but a geometry lesson burned Panthers at bends stalled columns where roads crossed chalk marks on aerial prints showing where notches had lived and worked. Maintenance logs told the other half of the story. More M4S answered at dawn than the week before. Disabled hulls returned to the net inside a day or two because recovery was a plan, not a hope. Crews rotated through wrench hours and catnaps and went back to lanes with guns that bore-sighted true. The German side wrote a different ledger. Brigades bled momentum into recovery convoys. Fuel trucks pushed forward to keep a punch alive became targets and hesitations. Damaged Panthers were pulled early because each hull represented not simply firepower, but a week of future options that would vanish if it burned here. Preservation became doctrine by necessity. Behavior changed on both nets. American crews spoke less and repeated more. The drill felt inevitable now, not clever. Infantry screens set on corners as if they had always belonged there. Smoke meant movement, not duel. German commanders began to refuse corners they could not scout, and to reset fights at longer lines. Every attempt to hunt across hedged country paid too much to mud and seconds. The long 75 still killed when the field opened and a clean frontal look appeared, but those openings came rarely and cost time to manufacture that the brigade could not afford under pressure. What travelled beyond Lorraine was a mood shift disguised as procedure. For American crews, the Panther became a conditions clause, dangerous at range and on clean ground, manageable in lanes, if the 4-beat cadence held and artillery stayed close. Fear turned into a checklist item. For German crews, the machine's aura turned into a burden that demanded escorts, smoke and recovery plans before it could be risked. Initiative shrank to what logistics would underwrite. Corps scheduling tightened rather than slipped. Pressure east of Nancy continued without the long pauses that armour catastrophes usually impose. Higher headquarters on the German side cautioned against piecemeal corner entries and talked about saving strength for stronger lines. Each caution conceded tempo to buy survival. The lesson that stuck, written in the quiet tone of AARs and maintenance tallies, was that the fight had pivoted from whose gun was longer to whose gun was present, level and repeatable at first light. If the same density of drill and recovery had been in the field 2 months earlier, would the heavy armour deterrent have collapsed before the Ardennes? That answer belongs to arguments and maps. The next episode stays with the math that decided Rhodes' Panther guns on paper versus Sherman availability in practice, the repair cycle that chose who owned the lane,